one. Okay, I guess we'll get started. Some of you know who I am, Kathy Spears. I'm from the Stanford Historical Society. And this program is part of the Society's program that we've set up for the Rev 250 for the 250th anniversary of our country. So tonight we have Anthony Musso. He has a new book that he wrote about the American Revolution in the Hudson Valley. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Actually, one correction, I don't have a new book on the Revolution, but what I do is, you see, I have a 3-volume book that I written called Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley. And for those of you not familiar with the book, there are 55 sites in each volume, total of 165 sites that are all under the tourist radar. So you would never find the FDR home or the Vanderbilt Mansion. These are all sites that are run by historical societies or other groups, the Masons, and many of them are free of charge or a nominal fee like $2 or $3 to get in and take a tour. But the reason I have these books with me tonight is that many of the sites that you're going to see associated with the American Revolution come from these books. And you're going to see some sites that you know, like Washington's headquarters and things like that, but I tried to incorporate a lot of under the tourist radar sites, and they come from these books, and that's why I brought the books with me. So, you know, obviously this area, the Hudson River Valley, was very, very active during the American Revolution. And we're going to start by going from a hilltop in Paulding. We're going to go all the way down the east side of the Hudson River, down to Tarrytown. And then we're going to cross the river into the town of Tappan and come north on the west side of the river. And so that's the way we're going to route it today. Now, in 1767, well, it would help if I turn this on. In 1728, a surveyor named Nathan Birdsall moved from Danbury, Connecticut with his family onto a hillside that was just east of the village of Fredericksburg. Today we call that village Paulding. So he settled on that hilltop there. Now when he did that, he became the first Quaker to settle in Dutchess County. And as he did that, more and more Quakers started pouring up onto the hillside, which of course is now known as Quaker Hill. That's how it got its name. Now, there were so many up there that in 1740, they built a 1-story Quaker meeting house. They petitioned the Religious Society of Friends for permission to build their own house of worship. And obviously, there were no cameras in 1740, but this is basically what the Quaker meeting house looked like. So this isn't the exact 1740 Quaker meeting house, but this is exactly what it looked like, with the typical 2 doors, one for men, one for women. Now, the problem they soon encountered over the next decade after they built this building was that there were so many Quakers, they couldn't get inside the building, everyone. And so they had to open the windows, and people would literally stand all around the outside of the building so that they could partake in the Sunday worship. Well, in 1767, they petitioned the Religious Society of Friends again to build a larger Quaker meeting house. And when they did, this one was knocked down. That's why I couldn't take any pictures of it. It's no longer standing. And right across the street from it, they built this 2-story oblong Friends meeting house. Now, this building here has a balcony that goes all the way around, so they had a lot more room. It was a bigger structure to begin with. I often have people at the end of the lecture, I do questions and answers, and they say, well, this is different because it only has 1 door instead of the typical 2 doors. But when you go inside, it immediately splits. So the women go to one side and the men go to the other side. But it's quite a beautiful building, and I'll explain to you why it's such good shape. Was built in 1767, and this is exactly how it looks. I took this picture from the site of the 1740. Now in 1778, 3 officers of the Continental Army entered the meeting house during worship. They were very respectful, quiet, they sat in the back row, and after the worship ended, they went up and they told the Quakers that were in there that they were commandeering the Quaker meeting house to be converted into a military hospital. George Washington had led an enormous amount of troops, and they were going to encamp there during the winter months. Well, they weren't going to be there permanently. It was 4 months. But they wanted to make this a hospital. Now, if you know anything about Quaker beliefs, pacifism is at the top of the list. And even though they were going to use the building for humanitarian purposes, they weren't going to have weapons in there and cannons. The Quakers totally abandoned the building for as long as the Continental Army stood in there. And on Quaker Hill, they found another building that they worshiped in. Now, the building, the head doctor there was Dr. James Fallon. It was basically called Fallon's Hospital, is how a lot of people referenced it. And approximately 100 troops were treated there throughout the 4-month existence of the hospital. Now, again, the Quakers went down Quaker Hill just a bit, and they found a new meeting house while the Continental Army was up there. And when the Continental Army finally left and the encampment moved on, that's when they returned to the Quaker meeting house and started worshiping there again. Now, in 1932, the meeting house was acquired by the Historical Society of Quaker Hill and Pauling, and they still own the building today. They've replaced the foundation a few times, and that's why it's in the great shape it's in right now. It is open to the public. Now, it used to be open to the public every Saturday and Sunday from May to October with a docent. The docent passed away, and they couldn't replace the docent. So if you want to go into the Quaker meeting house, which is pretty spectacular to see the interiors exactly as it was back in those days, you call the society. Now, at the end of each chapter in my book, if there's a website involved, I have the website, I have the telephone number and all the contact information. So if you wanted to visit the Quaker meeting house, you just call them and they'll arrange to have someone come up and open the meeting house for you and give you a little talk about it. So that's the meeting house that's open to the public. Now, George Washington wasn't going to stay out with the troops under a tent. He went down to the bottom of Quaker Hill on what is Main Street in the village of Pauling today, and he commandeered this house. It was the John Kane House, and this became his temporary headquarters for 4 months while the troops were in the area. John Kane was originally a patriot at the start of the American Revolution, but within 1 year, he believed that the patriot cause was hopeless. And so what he did was he changed sides and he became a loyalist. Now, he was alleged to have received a protection order from the British, and because of that, he was imprisoned in the Dutchess County jail in Poughkeepsie, the original one, for 7 weeks. Upon his release, he was offered a chance to sign the Articles of Association, which pledged loyalty to the Patriot cause. He refused. And because of that, he knew he had to flee. So he took 2 of his sons, and they fled to go behind British lines just south of White Plains at that time in Westchester County. The funny thing about it is, when he left with his 2 sons, he left his wife and another 9 children in his house in Pauling. He wasn't Italian, or he would have got killed by his wife before he left the property. I could tell you that right now. So George Washington literally shared the house with John Kane's wife and 9 children for the 4 months that he was there. Now, because of Kane's actions, the New York State legislature secured the house, as they did with many loyalists in this area. I know there's on Barmore Road, going down towards town of LaGrange, there was a Livingston member that turned loyalist, and his house was seized from him, and he had to run for his life. That was common practice. Now, when the American Revolution ended, Mrs. Kane and the 9 children relocated to Nova Scotia, Canada, and that's where they reunited with her husband. I don't know how that went, but they did reunite. In 1982, the Historical Society of Quaker Hill and Pauling, same organization, acquired this house, and they established a museum inside that you can go in now. They have one room all dedicated to George Washington, artifacts during his stay, and then of course the history of Pauling too. And this is a $3 admission to get into the John Kane House, and it's generally open May through the end of October. Through the years, the house was used as an inn, a general store, a bank, and from 1843 to 1850, it was the Pauling Post Office. So there's history other than the American Revolution in this house, and it's an interesting place to visit. For the next site, we're going to go down to Fishkill, New York, and on the southeast corner of Route 9 and Interstate 84, you will find the Van Wyck Homestead. This is so close to Interstate 84, if these trees weren't in bloom, you would see cars on their way to Danbury. That's how close it is to Interstate 84. Now, the original dwelling was built by Cornelius Van Wyck in 1732, and this was the original dwelling right here. In 1757, he added on this larger Dutch center hall colonial and converted the original building into a working kitchen, which, by the way, still has a working beehive oven in there. And on occasion, the Historical Society, who runs this now, fires that up and, has displays. During the American Revolution, George Washington personally commandeered this house and all the land that Van Wyck owned, which included, you probably remember the old, it's a now abandoned Duchess Mall. That was all his property. And so why would George Washington get that involved to secure this house and all that land? Well, this was a very strategic location. The British were desperately trying to split the colonies, and there were 2 ways they could do that. One was to come up the Hudson River with their ships, but the Continental Army felt they had enough forts all along the river, most of them on the west side of the river, and they also put the first chain across the river at Constitution Island in the area of West Point Military Academy. The other way to get up was by foot, by marching them up, and they would have to go through an area called the Wickapee Pass. Well, the Wickapee Pass just happened to go right through Van Wyck's property. So by putting 2,000 to 3,000 Continental Army troops here, they secured that area and they never had an incident. The British didn't even attempt to come up here. This was called the Fishkill Supply Depot. The building was the headquarters. That's where the officers would stay. And on the grounds, they started out with tents and then eventually built barracks, none of which are standing anymore. Now, during the war, one of the most famous spies, thankfully for the Continental Army, was this man, Enoch Crosby, very famous spy. And he had a very keen way to get behind British lines, find out what the British were planning to do, and then he would report those plans back to the Continental Army. Very successful. But to protect his identity, only the highest levels of generals knew of his status as a spy. General Washington, Alexander Hamilton, it was only the highest level. Well, on one occasion, he was riding on his horse, and a small group of Continental Army troops mistook him for a British spy, and they detained him, and they originally put him in the First Reformed Church, which is on the corner of Route 9 and Route 52 on Main Street in Fishkill. And that was a military prison during the war. So they detained him there, and then they took him back to the Van Wyck house, and they put him on a mock trial. It was all a farce, but to protect his identity, they put him under this trial, and at the end of the trial, they allowed him to quietly escape out the back door into the woods. There was no Interstate 84 there at the time, and so he could get back to doing what he did best. Now, ironically, that true story became the inspiration for a book by renowned American author James Fenimore Cooper, who heard about this tale through one of Van Wyck's sons. And he knew him and he got the story. Now, he wrote the book, The Spy, A Tale of a Neutral Ground. Has anyone read that book? Good. You read it? Kind of dry, right? I got a yes. The story is excellent, and it's a true story. But what he did was he changed Enoch Crosby's name. You don't want to put the spy's name in a book. And he made him Henry Birch, was the name he gave him. As far as the Van Wyck homestead, the house, he named it Wharton House. He didn't want to identify it as Van Wyck Homestead. Now, a few years ago, I was walking through the Stormville Flea Market, one of my favorite haunts of getting things that I don't need. And I was going through some old postcards, and I saw the image of the Van Wyck house, but on the bottom it said Wharton House. So even today, it's still known as Wharton House or the Van Wyck Homestead. Now, the Fishkill Historical Society was founded in the 1960s, and the reason they were founded was a group of concerned citizens got together when they found out that New York State was going to knock down the Van Wyck house to put an entrance ramp onto 84. And they said, no, not with all the history there. So it was founded, they saved it, and the state ended up putting a cloverleaf entrance on the west side of Route 9. They still own the building today, and they offer tours on Saturday and Sunday from May through November, actually. I know they just had a craft fair there. They have a lot of events. They also have Revolutionary War encampments where these reenactors come on, they put the tents up, they live there, they cook right on the grounds. So you might want to go to their website. It's listed at the end of the book because they list when they're going to have special events. You might want to save that for your visit. But they do give you about a 45-minute tour of the house for $3. And they'll take you in the room where Enoch Crosby was tried, and that's dedicated to Enoch Crosby. They tell you the whole history about him and the trial. They'll take you into the kitchen and show you the beehive oven, and there's some other things in the dining room that are noteworthy to see. But again, this is open to the public, and that was a real important thing to me with the sites in the book. I want them to be open to the public rather than just reading about them. So this is the room where they had Enoch Crosby on the trial. And like I said, they're open, I believe it's 1 to 4 on Saturdays and Sundays, and they're still open. I always see people going in there. Now, if you're going to visit this place here, I would suggest you take a little extra time. You could really make a day trip out of it. A half a mile north of the Van Wyck Homestead is Trinity Church, again, along Route 9. And Trinity Church during the Revolution was converted into a military hospital, similar to the Quaker Meeting House on Quaker Hill. The odd thing is, the locals used to call it Smallpox Hospital because that's what a lot of the troops from the Fishkill Supply Depot were treated there for. But the odd thing is, while it had the frames of the windows, there was no glass panes in there. So a surgeon would be doing an operation and birds would fly over his head. It was pretty bizarre, but that's what they used it for. And then a half mile north of this, you go up Route 9 up to Route 52 on Main Street, and you'll come to the First Reformed Church, and the bottom floor was the military prison where they had detained Enoch Crosby and other prisoners. And that's still right off of Route 9, and this is Main Street right here. And then you could, I assume everybody's gone to Fishkill at one time or another. There's a lot of very quaint restaurants and everything. It's a beautiful town because most of the buildings are 19th century in there. There's a couple of stagecoach stop hotels. Well, now they're not used as hotels anymore. One's a shoemaker, and the other one is a housing, front of a housing development. But it's a very quaint little village. You could stroll the village, get a bite to eat, and be a nice day. Now, there's one more site I want to show you in Fishkill before we move on, and that's 2 miles east of the village and this church. And it sits at the juncture of Route 82 and Route 52. It's up on a knoll on the north side of the road, and it's the Derek Brinkerhoff Mansion. Now, perched on top of this hill, this building had its beginnings in 1718. That year, Dirk Brinkerhoff built 2 stone rooms, which sit right in this corner of the building today. And that was the entire dwelling for the family, for the Brinkerhoff family. Just prior to the Revolutionary War, Derek Brinkerhoff surrounded those 2 stone rooms, which still sit there, and built what you see today, erecting a mansion around the original rooms. Derek Brinkerhoff, let me give you a little bit of his history. He was a member of the Provincial Assembly from 1768 to 1777. He was a delegate to the First Provincial Congress. He was a chairman of the Committee of Safety for the Rombout Precinct, and he was a colonel in the local militia. Now, the location of this mansion was a very convenient stopping place during the war. And in January 1777, while traveling to Philadelphia, John Adams spent one night here with the Brinkerhoff family. In March of 1778, the home was headquarters for Continental Army General Alexander McDougall. And among the visitors that went to this house during McDougall's occupancy included New York Governor George Clinton, our first governor, John Jay, General Henry Knox, and Benedict Arnold. General George Washington stayed at the house from October 1st to the 8th, 1778, and he was accompanied by his chief aide, Alexander Hamilton. Now, I'm not going to pull this on a group of my peers, but when I have a young group and I'm doing the presentation, I don't tell them the exact fact, but I allude to the fact that I wasn't sure, but the music for Hamilton might have been composed here. And suddenly they all sit up straight and they're all listening to me. Mission accomplished. Now, another famous person stayed here. French General Lafayette stayed at the home during part of Washington's visit. And then 3 weeks later, on his way back from Philadelphia, he stopped at the house again. And unfortunately, this time, he fell very seriously ill. And he ended up staying in the bedroom of this house for 1 month. In fact, George Washington sent his personal physician from his headquarters in Newburgh to take care of Lafayette while he was there. Now, the kindness of the Brinkerhoff family wasn't lost on Lafayette when he returned to the United States in 1824, and he presented the family with this beautiful, elegant French-made period desk. Now, unfortunately, the house was sold out of the Brinkerhoff family after 300 years, and the Fishkill Historical Society was able to go to the auction where they were auctioning all the furniture off. And so if you want to see that desk, it's now in the Van Wyck house. It's in the dining room of the Van Wyck house. Now, during the 19th century, Matthew Brinkerhoff covered the stone exterior with wood siding, replaced the original fireplace mantels with marble ones, and added 5 bedrooms to the 3rd floor. In 2014, the 10,000 square foot mansion was sold out of the family by one of daughter's the last to inherit the house. And it reopened as a bed and breakfast. Well, when I put the presentation together, I went on that bread and breakfast called the Brinkelhof Inn Bed and Breakfast. I went on their website just to let you know that you too can stay in the bedroom that George Washington used in 1778. They're all labeled with the names. And it will only cost you $299 a night. And if you wanted to stay in the room that Lafayette was in for a month, that'll cost you $399 a night. I'm going to stay home and just look at it. But the fellow that owns it was very, very friendly, and he actually, you know, you can go in there. He's a pretty good guy, and he has a lot of the documents and everything that he found up in the upper floors from the Brinkelhof family, now framed and hanging throughout the house. So it's really nice place to see. I'm gonna talk about two people now that, if their plan came to fruition, might have changed the whole focus of the American Revolution. That first person is Benedict Arnold. Now, he fought with distinction for the American Continental Army, and he rose to the rank of Major General. General George Washington gave him his fullest trust and placed Arnold in command of what was called Fort Putnam. But because they wanted to honor Arnold, they changed it to Fort Arnold. Today, we know that property is the Military Academy at West Point. But that was what he was put in charge of. The second person that was involved in this scheme was this fellow, British Major John Andre, and he served as the head of Britain's intelligence operations during the war. In September 1780, Andre arrived on the Hudson River aboard the British ship named Vulture. He took a rowboat to the shore on the west side of the river in Haverstraw, today's Haverstraw. Now, Arnold and Andre met after midnight in this house here, which belonged to Joshua Het Smith in Haverstraw, and in return for financial compensation, Arnold gave Andre all the plans of Fort Arnold at that time and the staffing, so that the British could come and overtake the whole fort if they had that critical information. Now, while the Smith House, which also you could see down here, it says the Treason House. This is a postcard picture. It was deteriorated and it was demolished in 1929, but this historic marker sits along Riverside Avenue in Haverstraw to identify the exact site of Andre and Arnold's meeting. Now, the next morning after they made the deal, the Vulture was observed on the river by Continental Army troops, and they opened fire on it, forcing the Vulture to retreat downriver. Well, that left Andre stuck. So Benedict Arnold gave him civilian clothes. He changed into civilian clothes, and he got him across the river in a rowboat. And now it was up to Andre to get back to British lines on the west side of the river. He had a horse, and he seemingly had no problem. He was going down the east side of the river. The British, of course, occupied New York City. It was all British troops. He made his way to Tarrytown, and on September 23rd, 1780, 3 militiamen detained Andre along today's Route 9 in Tarrytown, or Sleepy Hollow. And upon discovering the papers in his boot, he had those papers stuck in his boot, they turned them over to the nearby Continental Army post. Now, yes, they were militiamen, but the 3 men that captured him were also cowboys. Now, cowboys in those days were thieves. And what attracted them to him riding on the horse were those beautiful boots he had on. So you could see the boots laying on the floor. He's in his stocking feet. And when they took the boots off, the papers fell out. And they looked at the papers and they knew something was wrong. And that's when they brought him to the nearest Continental Army post. On the post, the officers there determined that the paperwork was in Benedict Arnold's hand. So the jig was up, so to speak, and Arnold had to get out of town too. Now in October 1853, this monument to mark the site of Andre's capture was erected at the entrance of Patriot Park. It's right on Route 9 in Tarrytown. And in September of 1980, this historic marker was added to the site. Now, Andre was transported across the Hudson River to the town of Tappan, Rockland County. Anybody here come from Tappan?
I'm from Rockland, but not Tappan.
You're not from Tappan?
I've been to all this.
Well, here's why I asked, because I was doing the Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley presentation, and I said, we're going to go across the river to Tappan, and a lady raised her hand right away, and she said, excuse me, young man. You call me young man, you have the floor. I don't. And she said, I lived there for 30 years, and we called it Tappan. That's what you call it? Yeah. Well, here we go. So anyway, the very next lecture, I says, well, I'm willing to learn, you know. So the very next lecture, I said, now we're going to go across the river to the town of Tappan. Another woman raised her hand. She said, I was born and raised there. Did you ever hear of the Tappan Bridge? I said, I can't win. So now I say them both. Thank you. Andre, now this building here is very interesting in its own right. This building is a 76 house. It was built as a dining and lodging facility in 1668. And because the town of Tappan was founded the same year, some of the earliest town meetings were held in the front dining room of this building. George Washington actually came down here because this was considered safe ground. He could come down from Newburgh and meet with his generals and all his leaders, and they actually stood at this bar. Nothing has been changed inside this restaurant. It's now just a restaurant. There's no lodging anymore. This is the actual bar that Washington would have leaned on with his generals strategizing on the war, and nothing has changed in there. In fact, when I went in there, I took a few bus trips. I do Hidden Treasures of the Hudson Valley bus trips, and I took some groups down here, and the owner in the place told me, you know, if you lean on the bar, you might get some of Washington's DNA on you. Unfortunately, I was a tank sergeant in the Army. I never made it to great general status. This place has been meticulously maintained. They didn't change a thing in here. Now, as far as Andre, he was incarcerated in this building. Now, there are no bars on the windows. He was held in this room, which you could see they have all their wine stored here. There's a doorway here. There's a doorway on the other side. And they had a Continental Army troop stand at both doors with a musket. And Andre just stayed in there until his trial took place. Andre, on September 29th, 1780, John Andre's trial started right across the street from this building. And by the way, that's a great restaurant, and I don't get any free meals. It's a really good place to go to. This is right across the street, the Tappan Reformed Church, and that's where the trial of John Andre took place. He was found guilty of espionage and sentenced to hang. Now, on October 2nd, Andre was transported from the 76 house to the top of a hill 2 blocks west of the 76 house. And right where this monument is today was where they hung him. And this isn't a hard street to find because it's called Andre Hill Road. So you just go to the top of the hill and that's there. But you can spend an entire day. This is a very walkable town, this Tappan. Very walkable town. So I want to show you one more site. You can make a day trip at it. I already showed you where you can have lunch. and the owner encourages you to walk around and look at all the original furnishings that are in there. But a block and a half from the 76 house, you'll come to this place here, the DeWint House. This is on an enormous piece of property. Daniel de Clark built this house in 1700. Following his death in 1731, Johannes DeWint purchased the house, and he lived there with his wife, his daughter, and his son-in-law, and his son-in-law's name was Major Frederick Blovilt, as in the town of Blovilt. A lot of the towns in Rockland County are named after military officers. Now, through Major Blovilt, Washington stayed at this home 4 different times during the American Revolution. His bedroom was right above this cellar door here. It would have been this part of the house. And he stayed there during the trial of John Andre. In fact, he signed the orders of execution in that bedroom. And on the day of the execution, he ordered all the shutters in the house to be closed. He was devastated because he was very close with Benedict Arnold, and he couldn't believe that he betrayed the country like that. Now, Washington's last stay in this house was when he negotiated for the final withdrawal of British troops from New York City, and that was the end of the war. This remained as a private residence all through the years, and of course it was updated with a refrigerator and a stove and different things. In 1932, a developer put in a bid to purchase this property. Again, it's a huge piece of property. He was going to demolish the house, and he was going to put in a strip mall, because we all need Chinese restaurants and pizzerias, let's face it. Well, the Order of the Masons were furious because George Washington was a lifetime Mason, and they said there's no way they're going to take this house down. So the Masons paid much more than the developer was willing to pay, and they own this house and the property today. They gutted the entire inside of the house, and from drawings and other material, they replicated what it would look like when George Washington was staying there. This was George Washington's hand on the execution orders for John Andre. Now, this would have been, this is what it looks like today. This would have been the bedroom that George Washington stayed in, and he could have very likely signed the execution orders at a table right in his room. It's been restored, and you can get about a 40-minute tour of this building. But before you go in for a tour, also on the site is this building. It was a large carriage house that was built in 1866 by a soldier returning from the Civil War. Well, the Masons converted this whole part of the building into a museum. So you go into the museum, you see a 12-minute film about the history of the property. They have artifacts. It's dedicated to George Washington, the Revolutionary War, and the Purple Heart, which of course George Washington invented as the badge of merit, and then it was renamed the Purple Heart. You go into there, and then you go into the house, and they give you the tour of the house. This is absolutely free. Compliments of the Masons. They do have a donation jar. You can put a couple of bucks in if you want. If you don't, they don't watch you. If you don't want to put anything in, you don't put it in, but this is absolutely free. So basically, Tappan is a free place to go to, because if you go into the 76 house, it's to eat. The church is free. They're not going to charge you to get into the church. This is free. The house is free, and you can drive up and see where the hanging took place. So it's a really nice place to visit, and I would really suggest it. Okay, now we're going to move up the 9W corridor from Tappan, and first stop we're going to make is Stony Point Battlefield. This is now a state park. British General Henry Clinton, frustrated in not being able to reduce the number of Continental Army troops in New Jersey and the Hudson Highlands due to a shortage of his own forces, focused his efforts on the forts along the Hudson River, and there were a number of them. Motivated by his access to the Royal Navy, Clinton first sought to concentrate on an area 20 miles north of Manhattan, dubbed by locals the Tappan Zee. That area is the widest part of the river, and it also got the name too because of Tappan Zee Native Americans that was settled there. It was the primary crossing point between New England and the rest of the colonies, so it was a very important place to put a fort. In May 1779, Clinton led 6,000 British troops and loyalists and landed right here at Stony Point, where they received no opposition. At the time, Stony Point was manned with only 40 troops. So when you see 6,000 troops coming at you, they burned down all the structures in the fort and they fled wisely. Now, setting up several cannons at the site, Sir Clinton kept 600 soldiers there and basically shut down the river crossing, which, as I told you earlier, they were trying to break the colonies up, and this was a good way to do it. General Washington was very concerned, and he ordered intense intelligence of the fortification, which was provided to the Continental Army by local residents who would going onto the fort daily, bringing them provisions to eat and everything, and they'd report back to the Continental Army. On July 15th, 1779, the Corps of Light Infantry, led by Brigadier General Anthony Wayne, and based on the intelligence gathered, engaged in a surprise attack at Stony Point and had a decisive victory there. Now, General Anthony Wayne was shot in the head, but it wasn't a serious enough wound. He survived it, and obviously they won that battle. The site also boasts a very interesting museum to tell you all about the history of the site. But I enjoyed the part. You just drive in, park your car, and they have trails with plaquettes all over to tell you all about the battle that took place there. And it was a very interesting site. Okay, we're going to head up to another fort that was along the Hudson River, and that's Fort Montgomery. And you can see the Bear Mountain Bridge right in the background of the picture I took, so you'll get an idea where it is. They actually had two forts right by the Bear Mountain Bridge. Fort Clinton was here, and Fort Montgomery was here. Now, why did they have two forts right there? The river makes a big bend at that point, and it's the narrowest part of the river. So with all the cannons facing down, they figured they could protect that part of the river. They had control of it. Fort Clinton is no longer there. In fact, if you're driving over the Bear Mountain Bridge and you're going under the toll plaza now, that's where Fort Clinton was, right there. Fort Montgomery, however, is now a New York State park. I remember when I first visited to get this picture here, it wasn't a state park. There was no place to park. I had to park about a half a mile away, hike back up, walk down, climb up and take these pictures. Now they have a beautiful parking lot. They have a visitors center. You can go in, watch a movie, and then again, walk the grounds, and they have placards to tell you all about the fort. Now, Fort Montgomery was 100 feet over the river, so it had a good vantage point. Now, what happened was on October 6, 1777, Sir Clinton, again, led 2,100 British troops from the land instead of the river. He surprised them. He came in from the land side instead of from the river. And unfortunately, Fort Clinton and Fort Montgomery combined only had 700 troops. So they were outnumbered 3-1. And the majority of the Continental Army troops were killed in battle during that attack. And the British did break the first chain. There were two chains brought across the river. The first one wasn't as durable as the second chain. If you go to West Point, you'll see the links. Anybody familiar with that at Trophy Point? That was from the second chain. The first one was kind of flimsy. They probably got the chain in the dollar store. But the British were able to bang right through that, and that's why they put the heavier chains up the second time. So now we're going to leave this area here, and we're going to go up further north on 9W into the city of Newburgh to this house here. This house was built in 1750 by Jonathan and Catherine Hasbrook, who operated a large stock farm on their property. During the 1860s, they constructed a grist mill on the western portion of the land and later built a dock right along the Hudson River to facilitate trade of their products. On April 1st, 1782, General George Washington took up residence at this house, making Newburgh the Continental Army's headquarters. Now, I've done a lot of traveling around the country and everything, and I see the signs everywhere. George Washington slept here, George Washington slept here. In total, he had 160 headquarters during the American Revolution throughout New Jersey and further north. But this one was the longest one. He was there for 16 months. In fact, Martha Washington actually joined him here for a while. During his time in Newburgh, Washington was assisted in his daily duties by 9 different aides de camp. Alexander Hamilton, one of them, who worked and lived with him in the house. On August 7th, 1782, Washington created this award. It was called the Badge of Military Merit to recognize enlisted soldiers and non-commissioned officers for noteworthy acts of valor, fidelity, or essential service. He awarded the first 3 badges of military merit right outside that house on the grounds of his headquarters to 3 soldiers during the American Revolution. Now, the badge fell into disuse after the American Revolution, but it was reintroduced in 1932 as the Purple Heart Medal. The Purple Heart is the oldest U.S. military award and is presented to members of the armed forces who are killed or wounded in battle. On November 10, 2006, New York Governor George Pataki dedicated the National Purple Heart Hall of Honor in nearby New Windsor to honor recipients of the medal. Has anyone visited this place? It's kind of the registry of all the Purple Heart. You can go in, say, my father got a Purple Heart. You can go in there and register him, and they have a running total of all the Purple Heart recipients around the country. And it's also a museum. They have a lot of displays of different award-winning people of the Purple Heart. The Hall of Honor is located adjacent to the New Windsor Cantonment, this right next to it, an encampment for 7,500 troops that were encamped there during Washington's stay in Newburgh. It is now a state-run historic site open to the public, and I believe this is open every day, but they have programs on the weekends there, and it's an interesting place to see. One final and important note related to Washington's headquarters in Newburgh is that is the site where he announced the cessation of hostilities, which ended the American Revolution. In 1850, the headquarters property was purchased by New York State and has since served as the first historic site overseen by New York. Okay, we're going to head a little west of here, not too far away. And this is elegant fieldstone house was built in a Georgian style in 1754 by local mason William Bull. It was meant to be a gift. He was a wealthy Newburgh businessman, and he built this house as a gift to his son upon his marriage. Supportive of the fight for independence, though, during the American Revolution, Ellison allowed various Continental Army officers to use this to oversee their operations. During the 2 years that George Washington's 7,500 troops occupied the New Windsor Cantonment, this man, the commandant of the operation, Major General Horatio Gates, resided 1 mile away from the containment at this house, the Knox. It's better known as the General Knox headquarters, and this is General Knox here. Ellison, whose primary residence was at Plum Point, Newburgh, operated a successful mill which shipped flour from the Newburgh waterfront to New York City. Now, General Knox occupied Ellison's house on 4 different occasions during the war. In addition to allowing Continental Army officers to occupy his house, Ellison also provided them with free flour and firewood. Due to its close proximity to Washington's headquarters, other offices also reside and operated here. In June and July 1779, General Nathaniel Greene, the quartermaster of the Continental Army, shared the house with Knox, and in August of that year, General Frederick von Steuben, Inspector General of the Army, used the house as his headquarters. Knox left the Ellison House for the final time in 1782 to assume command over the fortification at what we call today the West Point Military Academy. But that was what Arnold was in charge of earlier. Following the war, the house was sold multiple times, once being used as a boarding house. In 1922, the New York State legislature accepted the house as a gift and began a total restoration, and it is now open to the public. Most of these places are open May through October. They just don't operate them during the winter months. Now here's another unknown site. If you're going up 9W, you come into the town of Marlborough, just north of Newburgh, and one of the hamlets of Marlborough is Milton, and that's where the next site is located, the Anning Smith House. Leonard Smith purchased 70 acres in 1751 in the hamlet of Milton, and he built this 3,000 square foot colonial house overlooking the Hudson River in 1770. Now, one of Leonard's sons, Anning, had a keen interest in politics, and he became a strong and vocal opponent of British rule in the country. In 1775, he and his entire family signed the Articles of Association that supported the Continental Congress. Now, when colonists voiced strong opposition toward British-imposed taxes on paper, textiles, glass, silk, and tea that was imported from England, Anning Smith built a wool mill on his property to support domestic-made goods and avoid bringing them in from England. Because he was never shy about sharing his political beliefs, the loyalists in the region told the British where his house was located. Once they got through the chain and they were coming up the river, they were headed to north, they fired on any of the Patriots' houses that they were aware of, and they did fire on his house and his property. Unfortunately for them, the elevation of the house as compared to the river, the cannonballs fell short by about 30 feet, and they did find 7 cannonballs on the property after the British kept going. Unfortunately, Smith's sloop, which he used to deliver supplies to the Continental Army, didn't fare as well of the house, and the British sunk it. They just kept firing upon it and I often wonder if this is still at the bottom of the Hudson River. I can't see any reason why they would have raised it. It's probably deteriorated. It's all wood, so it's probably all deteriorated, but I imagine it's still down there in pieces. Now, generations of the Smith family resided at that house for the next 161 years. And in 2001, it was purchased and transformed into what is now the Buttermilk Inn and Spa. And there's Henry's Restaurant. It's a big complex. And if you go into the bed and breakfast, right behind the desk where you check in is one of those original cannonballs on a shelf that was fired at the house. Okay, moving north. The British are coming north. They're headed up. They had a primary mission, but they couldn't stop in Kingston, which was the first capital in New York, and they wanted to do some damage there. Now, in 1658, this 8-acre parcel of elevated land was occupied by early settlers in Kingston. Today, it's called the Stockade District or Upper Kingston. What happened was the settlers were on the same level of lower land farming right next to the Esopus Indians. And the Indians didn't care for the settlers. So to avoid the tension, the governor of the colonies ordered them to dismantle all their houses, the settlers, move up onto this 8-acre parcel, rebuild the houses, and then to protect it against any Native American attacks, they put a wooden stockade fence around the whole settlement. Fortunately, the Native Americans never attacked, but they had, and that's how it got the name the Stockade District. In 1737, the Ulster County Courthouse was built, and 40 years later, it was chosen to host the Constitutional Convention that established New York State. The Abraham Van Giesbeck House, which is still there, and you could tour this for $3, became the site of New York's first government. This was the New York State Capitol. That same year, 1777, those British ships that were coming up the river docked at Kingston, and they took the settlement by surprise. In all, 326 buildings in the Stock District were destroyed by fire. Now, just prior to the British troops arriving in the district, Governor George Clinton got wind of them coming up, took all the documents, all the people that worked for the New York State government, and they relocated nearby to Hurley, New York. It was a matter of under 10 miles away. And they set up in this house here, which was the Jan Van Duzen House. If you've ever gone to Hurley, it's all stone houses on Main Street. In fact, in the summer, they have the Hurley Stone House Day. They're all privately owned, but all the owners agree to open their houses and let you in, tell you the history of the houses. It's very interesting. But this was New York State's capital for a total of 6 months. He waited for Kingston to start being rebuilt. The British had left, and then they moved the government back to Kingston. Now, they did a lot of damage. They won the Battle of Fort Clinton. They won the battle at Fort Montgomery. They destroyed our first capital, Kingston, but there's a silver lining. Because of the time spent at those two battles at Fort Montgomery and Fort Clinton, and the time they spent attacking Kingston, the British troops did not arrive in time to fulfill their primary mission, was to join other British troops at the Battle of Saratoga. As a result, the British were short of people, and the Continental Army had a decisive victory in that the Battle of Saratoga, and is widely known as the turning point in the war. The Continental Army was not doing that great in the war until the Battle of Saratoga. And by the way, the hero of the Battle of Saratoga happened to be Benedict Arnold. You were waiting for that, right? So, you know, we lost a lot of things. We lost the capital. They had to rebuild Kingston. It was down to nothing. But in the end, their delay doing all these things going up there led us to a decisive victory up at Saratoga. And that's the presentation on the Hudson Valley and the American Revolution. I'll take any questions if you have any. Any questions?
Not a question, but a comment. I grew up in Indiana near Fort Wayne, which is named for General Mad Anthony Wayne. And he was known after the Revolution as an Indian fighter, and he helped clear out the Northwest Territories of all the Indian tribes. But I visited Stony Point, and I think the way he got his name of Mad Anthony Wayne is that Stony Point was considered impregnable on the bluffs over the Hudson,
Yes.
surrounded by swamps. There's just like one causeway
A
coming
lot
out
of
of it.
swamps, yeah.
And instead of attacking it outright on the causeway or up the bluffs, during the night, he came through the swamps with his men and took it virtually without a shot.
Yeah, that's all explained in the
Yeah.
chapter on the Stony Point battlefield.
So I think that's how he got his name, is Mad Anthony.
Yeah, yeah. And actually on the Palisades Parkway, just south of the Bear Mountain State Park, there's the Anthony Wayne Park. It's
Mhm.
right there, it's dedicated.
It's exit 17.
Excuse me?
It's exit 17. Recre-
17?
Yeah, Anthony Wayne Recreation Center.
Yeah, it's, he did a good job that, because like you said, the British never would have expected him to come in that way.
Mhm.
I remember writing about that in the chapter of Stony Point, how it was just marshland all around there. Yeah. Did you have one? I saw another hand.
I don't know if this is relevant here or not, but when Burgoyne surrendered in Saratoga, to Gates
Right.
under the Articles of Convention, which is something of a swindle and a scandal. His surrendered troops were taken to Boston, and hence, from there the Continental Congress realized that they'd been had, in a sense, because these troops would have been repatriated to England, and they would have passed ships coming the other way with 5,000 more troops. So they moved them to Charlottesville, Virginia, I believe.
I'm not sure about that, where they went.
They walked from Boston to Virginia. 5,000 prisoners and 1,000 escorts.
Wow.
And they came right through Dutchess County. This is something that I'm really interested in because they came through the Harlem Valley from Sharon,
Right.
and they came through South Millbrook, or Mechanic as it was called,
Mechanicville.
and it's, different theories that I wanna know where they walked. I wanna know where the footfalls happened.
That's a
The
lot of
way that you
research.
can do that with Benedict Arnold. You can see where he fled when he was exposed.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You
with
can
Benedict
follow the
Arnold.
trail and you can put your feet on the ground where that happened. And I'd like to be able to clarify that, and I have not yet been able to do that.
Well, with Benedict Arnold, he eventually ended up going to England. They couldn't stand him. They couldn't stand him. Well, number one, he was a traitor. He was labeled a traitor.
And they
Even
lost-
though they helped he was labeled a traitor. He had a miserable life over there.
And they lost John Andre, whom they loved.
And they did, yeah.
Washington would have given up Andre for Arnold.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I don't
conjecture.
think he would have given up Andre. He was,
To get Arnold?
well, he fought to get the hanging. An officer is not supposed to die that way. He's supposed to die by a firing squad. And Andre was protesting that there was gonna be a hanging instead of a firing squad.
Yes.
And that's how furious Washington was with Andre pulling this off. But he was really disappointed in Benedict Arnold because he trusted him so much,
It's a wild story how they got caught.
Oh, yeah, yeah. In fact, there's, I think it's in volume 3, there's a Quaker meeting house in Yorktown Heights that Andre, on the morning of his capture, he showed up at this Quaker meeting house and he was dressed in civilian clothes and they fed him breakfast. And then he went on his way and later that day got captured down in Sleepy Hollow, Barrytown. Yeah, but Benedict Arnold made it and he went over to England and his life was destroyed though. There's a lot of speculation that Benedict Arnold's wife was the instigator of that. Because he was a little disappointed that he didn't get promoted he was passed over for some promotion. And he was upset about that, and she was buzzing in his ear, well, they don't treat you right, and this, pillow talk will do that. And she was firing them all up. And the thing about it is Benedict Arnold's wife, her family were loyalists. So there was that to put into the mix too. It's really strange how that worked out. So, anyone else? Yes.
Right near the West Point, there's a place, Camp Smith.
Yes.
What's the history on that?
That's still open today. It's, my nephew's a colonel in the Army, and he goes to meetings there all the time. It's just a base. It's
That's by Peekskill, right?
Peekskill, exactly, yeah.
Just north,
Yeah. They, it's just a military compound. They have a lot of training down there. He goes down there for training all the time.
Does West Point still use it?
No,
No, not at
no
all.
connection.
No.
But you
In
have all
fact,
the
there's
boats collected down there.
Excuse me?
You have a program that you do with the boats that have been.
The mothball fleet on the
Yeah.
Hudson, that's another book I wrote, yeah. Yeah, I have 11 books, so I just worried I don't show up with the right, I'm gonna talk about the American Revolution, and I show up with my rock and roll books. It's not gonna go over well. No, I have a 2-volume book, Setting the Record Straight, where I interviewed 100 recording artists from the 50s and 60s. But that wouldn't go over well if I showed up with that tonight. Okay, so thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'm here. I'm not running anywhere. The books are available if you're interested in, and again, it's not just American Revolution sites. There's the Smith Brothers Restaurant on Market Street at Poughkeepsie. That's where they cook the first cough drops. They call them cough candy in the kitchen restaurant, and a lot of different places around the area. They're $20 each, or all 3 for $55. But thank you very much for coming.